Hey everyone, welcome back to my round 4 recap from the Madrid Chess Festival. Coming into this game, I was playing David Lariño Nieto from Spain. And yeah, I really had no idea what to expect in the opening. It was a nightmare to prepare for this opponent because he's capable of playing pretty much everything from the first move. So before the game, I just decided to play pawn to e4, and he actually arrived about 10 minutes late. But eventually he did arrive and played pawn to e5. And after knight f3, he played pawn d6. This is called the Philidor's Defense. And I actually prepared this for my round 2 opponent, Grandmaster Alvarez, who's played this in the past as black. And I also checked this before the game today, this morning, because Nieto actually played the same opening in this tournament against Alexander Ostrovsky. And yeah, I wasn't expecting him to repeat the Philidor, but yeah, I guess he did. And I went for the main line, pawn d4. After takes, knight f6, knight c3. This is kind of the standard approach for white. It does resemble a Scotch opening, but because black has committed a pawn to d6, the bishop on f8 is a bit stuck. And I think the overall reputation of this line is considered to be just slightly preferable for white. So my opponent continued here, bishop to e7, and I went for this move, bishop to f4. I think this is one of the more aggressive approaches. I'm pretty sure Ostrovsky played g3, and I forget the exact move order in their game, but Nieto struck with a very quick h5 and eventually d5, and their game got very crazy from early on. With bishop f4, the idea is to play queen d2 and queenside castle, and it may seem more natural to put the bishop on e3, but the reason I don't play bishop e3 is because there's knight g4 ideas. So the bishop stands nicely on f4, my opponent castles queen d2, knight c6, and I castle queenside, and we do trade knights on d4. So I'm just enjoying a slightly more active position. With a pawn on e4, white has more space, and a bit easier play leading into the middle game. So my opponent plays bishop to e6, I play f3, knight d7, and king to b1. So this is basically the ideal setup for white in this line. The king is just a bit safer on b1, and the eventual plan going into the middle game is to pawn storm with eventually g4 and h4 and h5 and try and attack on the king side. However, I didn't really get a chance to attack in this game because my opponent was the first one to seize initiative. Let me just hide the notation to avoid spoilers. But he started with the move bishop to f6, attacking my queen. I drop back to d2, and then he played the move pawn to b5. And this was not entirely expected. I knew this was an idea to sack the pawn, but black is playing super, super aggressively, either trying to achieve b4 and kick away my knight, or if I take the pawn, then the b file would open, and it does look scary with black having these two bishops staring down at my queen side where my king has committed to. So I took my first extended think of the game trying to figure out how to respond to such a move. And I wasn't sure if my opponent was still in his preparation or just bluffing me, because he was basically blitzing out the whole opening after arriving late. And after some thought, I did decide to snag the pawn and play the move bishop takes b5. The main alternative was to play knight d5, but I wanted to call my opponent's bluff, and I thought this was actually a pretty straightforward move to calculate because white's threatening bishop takes d7 and possibly e5 to follow to make use of the pin on the d file. And it seemed like black was kind of limited in options that he could play here. Now he quickly played rook to b8. I take on d7. And now the issue for black is if he takes with the queen on d7, then I have e5, and I think this is really good for white. The line I calculated was takes, and then takes, and then takes, and then takes, and then takes. And then in this position, I have takes, winning a pawn and defending my knight on c3. And white would be up a pawn here, I think with very good winning chances. So for this reason, he didn't take with the queen on d7, he took with the bishop. And now I took another think, because e5 is still an idea, but I wasn't so sure about e5, because if I go for it, then it's a little bit different, because he can take and then take, and he doesn't have to take on d7 right away. He can play this move. He takes f4, unleashing the bishop, and now it's a bit different, because I'm not actually winning the c7 pawn, and black has a threat of course, bishop takes c3. And I spent some time calculating here. There were a few lines I was trying to dig into. One line was takes and takes and takes and takes. And I was trying to evaluate this ending. It would be equal material, but maybe the knight is slightly better than the bishop. I looked at this and then this and then this, but I wasn't sure how to evaluate this. Now, the other thing I looked at was if we got to this position, there's a really cool move here, knight e4. And I was trying to make this work in my calculations. The point is I'm sacking the pawn on b2, but if black takes it, I just play king c1. And I thought maybe there's some interesting ways to just be winning for white, because I'm threatening knight takes f6. Or even takes and then takes on f6. But the reason why I didn't go for this was I think black has at least a draw with this move, bishop takes b2. And then if takes, there is bishop a3. And I'm not escaping the perpetual check. I could take on b8, take king a1, and even though white is up a full rook, it's just going to be a draw after repetition. So yeah, hopefully this gives some glimpse into my calculations. And basically, I was digging very deep into these e5 lines, and then I took a step back and realized I have other options in the position. And the move I ended up playing was just a very patient, somewhat prophylactic move, pawn to b3. And the point of this move is I want to undermine the rook on the b file, and I want to prepare knight to d5. Now I can't play knight d5 right away because, of course, yeah, knight's pinned to the b2 pawn. So b3, it's just a preparatory move and prophylactic move. And even though it does look weakening to my dark squares, I do have the dark square bishop. So there's going to be ideas of eventually bishop c1 to b2, or even bishop e3 to d4. So the game goes on from here. He plays bishop e6, I play knight d5, and then he takes and I take. And I was feeling good because I've won a pawn and I've traded knight for bishop, so I've removed black's bishop pair. But it still looks maybe a little bit scary with black having the potential attack against my king. And here he played the move queen to e8, which is probably not the first move that comes to mind, but this is a tricky move because he has ideas of rook b5 and then potentially swinging the rook over to a5. And he has another idea of just bringing the queen to a4 because my b pawn is pinned. So I took a think here, and I decided to play the move bishop to e3. And this is really just going for the trade. I really want to play bishop d4, get rid of this bishop, and live happily ever after. But then he responded with queen to a4, and I realized that things are not so simple because now if I play bishop d4, he has the idea to play c6, and then if I take on d6, he has rook d8. And this looks to be a little bit annoying for white. Now, another thing to point out is if I just ignore this move and play something like g4, then black has the idea to play rook b5, not only attacking my queen, but setting up a very nasty checkmating idea. And let's say white is careless and plays a move like queen d3, then black can take on a2 and say, oh no, my queen. And if I take, then there's check and king b1 and checkmate. So very important checkmating idea to keep in mind here. So I was aware of the danger in this position after queen a4. And after some thinking, I began digging into this variation with bishop d4 and c6 and queen takes d6 and rook f d8. Because at first it looks like white is just losing material there. But I dug just deep enough to find a really nice move in that variation, and I came to the conclusion that I can get away with bishop d4. So this is what happened. I played bishop d4. My opponent pretty quickly played c6. I took the pawn, and then he played rook to d8. Now I had to see the next move coming back from when I played bishop d4, because it looks like black is going to win the bishop with my queen skewered on the d-file, black having 3 attackers on d4. And this is a nice puzzle, so if you want to try and find the move for white, feel free to pause the video. My opponent actually told me after the game that he had overlooked my next move, but the move is very simply queen c7. And I'm just letting black take on d4, but there's really nothing good to take with. If the rook takes, then I take on b8 and white's mating. A queen can't take because the rook supports it. And what my opponent played in the game, bishop takes d4, walks into a pretty nice sequence where I take on d8, deflecting the rook away from pinning my b-pawn. And this is a fancy way to trade queens. And after all said and done, I'm up a rook for a bishop. However, it doesn't really end here because black still has initiative. And he played the move rook b8. I played the only legal move, king c1. And after bishop to e3, my only legal move is rook to d2. Now, when I played bishop d4 from several moves ago, just going back to this position, I did calculate to the position after bishop e3 check, and I saw that with rook d2, if he plays rook to d8, I have rook hd1, and even if black wins back the exchange, I'm going to be up at least a pawn, if not 2 pawns. So I was feeling very good once we got to this position. Now, my opponent didn't play rook d8, instead he played rook to b4. So he's leaving my rook pinned and going after very weak pawn on a4. And I basically accepted the fact that I'm going to lose back a pawn, and I played the move rook to d1 here. My plan was to over-defend the rook, so if he takes on a4, then I can play king b2. And then if takes, I'd be threatening checkmate and also have king b3. And white's also up a pawn, so I think there's very good winning chances here. And something pretty similar happened in the game. Before taking the pawn, he played king to f8. I played c3, and he took the pawn, and I played king b2. And yeah, he traded the bishop for the rook. And this leads us to the next stage of the game, which is a pretty simplified rook ending, where white's up a pawn. And in the moment, I wasn't like entirely confident that I could convert the advantage, but I was feeling pretty good, especially because I'm controlling one of the only open files, and I have potential to get my king active, maybe eventually get to c5 with the king and target the c6 pawn. And going forward from here, the play flowed pretty nicely. After king e7, king b3, rook a5, c4, I'm just expanding on the queen side. He played pawn h5, I played king b4, chasing away the rook. And the rook was pretty limited on squares. He doesn't really want to go back to a6, so he played the move rook to g5. And then I played pawn to h4, kicking the rook, making it choose between e5 or g3. And he played a smart move here. If he plays rook g3 immediately, I would have king c5. And I think this would be a very easy win for white. So before moving the rook, he played a5 check, prompting me to move back to c3. And then he played rook g3. The issue for black, though, is my king can still come in. And I play king d4, preparing to come into c5. And in this position, I think black had 2 ways of playing. One option would be to play king to d6 to try and prevent white from getting king c5. But if my opponent were to go for this move, I think I was going to play e5 check. And then like once the king moves, I can play this and then eventually f4. And also ideas of rook d6. So rather than playing king d6, my opponent went for another idea in the position, pawn g5. Black is trying to get counterplay on the king side. The problem with this move is it just allows me to invade with my king. And that's what I do. King c5, takes and takes. And okay, black has a move h3, so destabilizing my pawn chain on the king side. But I was okay with this. I take, and after takes, I play pawn c5. And now I have a pass pawn, and not only that, but the king is cut off because it can't pass the d file. I have my rook very nicely placed on d2. So now it's just a matter of advancing my pawn. And yeah, going forward from here, my opponent took on h3. I played king to b7. And yeah, the king just wants to escort the pawn down the board. And there's no rook b3 check because, yeah, my useful pawn on a2. So my opponent started with rook to c3. I played pawn c6. And then he tried to move rook to c4. But this made life pretty easy because I just play c7, threatening the queen with c8. And he gave a check. I moved to a6. He moved back. I moved to b6. And basically the way that white wins this is by getting this move rook to d8 and then threatening to queen the pawn. And yeah, black doesn't really have a great way of stopping it. He tried rook b4. I just took the pawn on a5. He moved back. I moved back. He gave a check. And then I moved to c5. And yeah, the rook was a little bit too close to the king. And now after he goes back, I play the move rook to d8. And now I'm pretty much guaranteed to queen the pawn. He resigned in this position, but just to show if he gives a check, I can defend the pawn. And if he gives another check, I would just hide on a file. And white is queening next move. So a few things to note. First of all, I was considering promoting to a knight just for fun. It's still winning for white, but yeah, rook d8 is much cleaner. And then the other thing to note is that he probably could have put up a bit more resistance. Instead of playing the move rook c4, I think he could have tried the move rook c1. And yeah, I was trying to figure out the cleanest way for white to win this position, because if I advance the pawn, then he can start giving checks, and it's not as simple. Like king a6, rook here. I'm not actually winning the pawn in this line. So I think if he were to play rook c1, I was going to start with rook b2 and just threaten c7, make sure there's no checks. And then if he were to play king d8, I was calculating rook b5. And I'm pretty sure this is still like a pretty straightforward win. I'm just going to check with the engine, make sure that this is all pretty clean. Yeah, h4, rook d5, king e7, and then I could take on a5. c7 is also winning. Yeah, c7, rook b1. How does this work? King a6. Wait, how does white win this? King a6, rook c1. No, we don't want to move to a6. We might have to move to c8 and then eventually get this check and then walk this way. That's probably the way to win. But yeah, the engine says this is completely winning. There might be multiple ways, but yeah, overall, it was a pretty clean game, and I'm quite happy with the game overall. I guess we can go ahead and check the game review. Yeah, let me just show this here. But according to Lichess Game Review, I only made one inaccuracy in this game. Let's go to this moment. Okay, the engine doesn't like bishop e3, but yeah, by the time we got to this position, it's very, very good for white. So I think I'll wrap it up here. This win puts me at 2.5 out of 4. I have another game starting in about 3 hours from now. So thanks everyone for watching. I'll see you guys soon.